We'll see. Hi and welcome everyone.
Hello.
Hi. Oh, more people coming in too. Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming today. I'm Chelsea from Commonwealth Canada. We also have Ken and Floyd, and then our speaker today is Martin Adams. We're just going to keep letting some people in as they come in. But while we're waiting, if you want to put where you're coming from today in the chat, that would be great. I'll read out where people are joining us from. That's always fun for me. So I'm joining you from the metropolis of Ingersoll, Ontario. Ken is coming to you from Markham, and Floyd's actually on vacation right now in California. So he's enjoying even more sun than we are in Ontario. Ooh, Stouffville, not too far. Oh, and Nova Scotia. There's always some East Coasters. I believe Martin's joining us from the West Coast. So we're right across Canada today. So, oh, Victoria as well. Awesome. Originally Ireland. That's fantastic. Ireland's a beautiful country too. Philadelphia. Wow. Quite a ways. Windsor area. I was actually born and raised in Windsor, and my sister still lives in Kingsville. So I'm quite familiar with Leamington. Oh, BC, Delaware. Wow. Amazing. Toronto, New Jersey. Wow, we got all over the place. And in Alberta, sometimes we don't get people from Alberta. So that's always exciting too. So welcome everyone. I'm happy to see you here. We will get started in just a couple minutes. Oh, yeah, traditional territories of the Wasanic, I think, Sanghees and the Lekwungen. Nice, very nice. There was a cool app at one point where you could text it and it would tell you what traditional lands you were on. And I thought that was such a cool idea. So awesome. Well, I'm so happy to see everyone here. Again, we'll get started in a couple minutes. I'm just going to post right now. We do have an app called Slido, where you can ask questions during the presentation. We'll answer them at the end. In Saskatoon, terrific. So I will post a couple times the way to get to Slido. I'll post a direct link, but you can also go to slido.com and we have a code that you can enter in with. And that's all in the messages there. So yeah, terrific. Oh, a colleague from the UK, Floyd says, is also here. That's terrific. So I'll post the Slido a couple times. You can ask questions there during the presentation. We'll get to them at the end. You can also upvote comments and questions that you think are particularly insightful or that you want to see an answer to. We've had a lot of people join us for longer after the presentations are done with some of our intro calls so that they could answer all of the questions or see their question get answered. So yeah, Slido is an app that we're going to use that lets people ask questions during the presentation without disrupting the flow of the presentation. And you can also upvote questions that you find interesting. So I'll make sure that I keep posting the link during the presentation though, so that no one gets confused about that. And then at the end of the presentation, I'm also going to send a survey out in the chat. So just keep an eye out for that before you leave by the end of the presentation today. Okay, terrific. So I'm just going to wait another minute or two just to see if we get anyone else in, and then I'll introduce Floyd and have him give you a brief intro before we get started. So, but I'm so excited to see some people here.
Yeah, we're 50 people, a lot of familiar faces.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
And from all over the place. We have quite a lot of people from quite a lot of places. So that's terrific. So if you were here for any of our intro calls, you'll see you may have used the Slido before, but if not, I'll make sure that I keep putting it in the chat there. Ooh, Brooklyn, New York. Very nice.
Feel free to put in the chat maybe why you're here. What's the main question you came with? That could help frame where we go with the talks.
And we will be recording this Zoom meeting. So if you want to share this with anybody afterwards, we'll have a link for you.
Oh, and Martin has a team of family members and friends. That's great. Oh, yeah. Read Martin's book, Land. Absolutely. Oh, and Alex is here because of universal basic income. That's terrific. Same, honestly. That's how I got here in the first place, at least. All right.
Great to see many familiar faces helping lead
Yeah.
the charge in the basic income movement here. Welcome, everyone.
Awesome, Logan. Logan's looking to how they can get involved. All right, Floyd, I'm going to turn the floor over to you, and I'm just going to keep letting people come in. But at this point, I'm going to turn the questions over to Floyd, and I'll keep posting in the chat. If anyone has questions, I'll try my best to answer them there.
Okay, I'm going to talk for about 5 minutes, and then we're going to pass over to Martin, just really introducing briefly what this is, why are we here. And just apologies while I just get this set. So today we're going to hear from Martin Adams. He's someone I came to know through doing this work that I really look up to and admire. Did a lot of personal time and effort to dig into what's wrong with the world and distill it. His book Land is extraordinary. Those of you who may have heard of land value tax before, or Henry George, to me this book is like the modern version of Progress and Poverty that is in a modern contemporary language that I think everyone can understand, especially Gen Z. And I'm really honored to have Martin here and create this audience to hear from him. So a bit about these calls. You are on a Commonwealth Canada community call. This is where for every 4 to 6 weeks, we'll be bringing in guest speakers, examining different aspects of what we call Commonwealth. This call specifically is going to be focused on Martin and his views on land. But I'll just talk for a couple of minutes after this, introducing Commonwealth itself. But if you want to do a more fulsome introduction to Commonwealth on May 4th, you can RSVP right now at this link. And I'll be doing a 20-minute talk on what is Commonwealth and how can we make it come to Canada, where we can ask lots of questions there. And our next scheduled community call will be on June 22nd with Brent Rinelli, who literally wrote the book called Commonwealth Dividends. And we're for Commonwealth Dividends, and we independently came up with this name because truth knows no boundaries, and it's kind of cool that there was actually a book called Commonwealth Dividends, even though we've been thinking about it since 2018. And this book is quite recent; it's from 2021. So that is, feel free to sign up for those right now if you're interested in these. But yeah, this call will be very minimal on overall Commonwealth and more about land. But I'm going to be talking a bit about Commonwealth in a moment. So as Chelsea mentioned, Q&A in these calls is great. Please go to slido.com, put in this code, or follow the link Chelsea put in the chat, and ask questions while I'm talking, while Martin's talking, because at the end, you can actually vote up questions. And at the end, we'll talk about it. So the call will officially end at 3 Eastern or at 12 Pacific, but we'll keep going as long as people want, at most another hour. Last time we had calls like this, people stayed a whole extra hour, like half the audience stayed just asking questions. So we're all quite passionate about these topics. So that's it. I'm going to do a really brief discussion now about what is Commonwealth for those who are new here. So what we advocate for a national investment fund, just a fund like any other that owns stocks and bonds that can pay people dividends as an ownership right, as well as a land value tax. The outcome of both of these would be dividends as a form of a property right that everyone has a share of part of the value of growing value of land, as well as from the stock portfolio. That could also be used to reduce or eliminate income taxes for 2/3 of Canadians, since land value tax would be how we contribute to government instead. And this would be very progressive, and we could go more into that at another time. But one of the reasons for this view is to create commonwealth, a form of wealth held in common in this time of extreme wealth inequality that gives everyone a bit of ownership income and can reduce the cost of living depending on how these things are taxed. Overall, we see that we are in a world right now where a lot of the value that is being created by the community, is coming from nature. It's not being created by nature or business, by individuals or business. So we can create a society that is actually in some ways more capitalist in that we are reducing taxes on work, but is also more egalitarian by.
Oh yeah, so we need that. It has a control bar? Yeah. There's nothing inside.
Sorry, someone needs to be muted. So that said, I'm going to just talk a couple of minutes about these concepts. So cost of living is going up. We can all see it. It's going crazy. People are spending so much of their time and money just treading water. We're seeing Rents and mortgage payments eclipse more than 50% of people's earned incomes, and it's just getting worse. And there's no end in sight. Meanwhile, we're also seeing wage growth stalled for many decades. We're in a situation where wage growth has been shown by researchers to be stagnant for many decades, and technology and technological automation is the prime reason, has been shown by researchers. 50 to 70% of the changes in wage structure has been driven by automation and technological job displacements. And as we know, with the onset of artificial intelligence, that's going to get a lot worse. So as a result, these two trends, rising cost of living, primarily housing, automation, reducing wage growth, you could say that we are currently in a ownership society, an ownership economy, where those who own things are the ones who are benefiting and making money, and those who work are seeing increasingly diminishing share of their income going to their quality of life, and it's just going to get worse. So if we're in an ownership economy, then it kind of makes sense to create a bit of ownership for everyone. And how do we do that? Well, we do that by looking into what economists for hundreds of years has seen as something called economic rents, unearned income that is created from nature, created by the community, not created by the individual. And economic rents can be seen as a form of common wealth that can pay money into this investment fund, that can pay people dividends, taking on monopolies, looking at what's driving the rising values of land, which is community created, and finding ways to reduce the cost of land and housing through a land value tax, the proceeds of which could go to pay everyone dividends, as well as reduce taxes for those with least wealth. So the overall goals, the why of Commonwealth, is to find a way to share, to create more higher incomes for people connected to economic growth and reduce the cost of living. And the best way to reduce the cost of living is to take on the incentives that are driving up the cost of living. And we feel that a land value tax and various eco taxes can do that. So that's what Commonwealth is. If you want to hear more about this, I invite you to the next community call, where we'll go deeper onto Commonwealth specifically. And in the meantime, it's really a pleasure to invite Martin Adams to talk about land's impacts in our economy, and how we can turn this around, how we can create a lower cost of living, and improve and create a society we'd all be proud to be a part of. And at the end, we'll go into Q&A. Some of you are here from a basic income background and want to know, what is this Commonwealth thing versus basic income? It's definitely not in competition with, it's a complement to the idea of a guaranteed basic income. But we can talk about that later. And also very honored that there are a lot of experts here in the room with us today, many of which came before, helped to answer questions. So we're really honored to have people here who can help us all along in our learning journey. So that said, Martin, feel free to share the screen and begin the talk.
Martin, I think you got muted somehow. Let me try to fix that.
There we go. I think I just
Awesome.
fixed it. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen with you here. Just a sec. There. I hope everyone can see the slide. Well, welcome to this talk. Thank you for taking time out of your, no doubt, busy day to attend and participate. This is a very important topic, and I believe it affects all of us, homeowners, renters, and the unhoused alike, because the cost of living, as Floyd said, is incredibly high. I would like to start first by really extending my appreciation to Commonwealth Canada, and specifically to Floyd and his team for not only hosting this talk and other talks, but also for even having created Commonwealth Canada. Floyd put his own money into the organization and made it happen. And to me, that speaks a lot more than talk, when someone walks the walk. So that is something to be truly appreciated. I just can't speak highly enough of Floyd, and really appreciate the work he's doing. And the team as well, Ken, Chelsea, and all the other people who are working in the background really hard to make this happen. And while I'm here, I'd like to direct you to this very important link, commonwealth.ca/report. I will get back to it later on. They put a lot of work into this report, so I recommend you download the report. Before we start, I just wanted to do a brief land acknowledgement. Where I live in Vancouver here on the East Coast in Canada. Vancouver is located on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. At first, when I heard my first land acknowledgement, I was like cynical because I thought that people just say these things and they ignore the facts and then keep plundering the land anyway, right? But I came to realize that a land acknowledgement actually leads to an awareness, which can lead to reconciliation. Just by being aware that we are the ones, our society took land away from the First Nations and Native Americans. And in fact, those are the people that suffer the most today. And lastly, a land acknowledgement is actually very relevant to this talk because we are seeking a new relationship to the land that we're occupying and to the people that we've taken it from. Very briefly about me, I'm the author of the book Land, A New Paradigm for a Thriving World, published by North Atlantic Books out of Berkeley, California, great publisher. You can buy my book online, local bookstore, or read it online. So there's a lot of material that I'm going to compress into a very short amount of time. So I'll be zipping through the slides. Don't worry if you don't catch something because it'll be recorded. You can revisit it at a later point in time. If you have any questions, please write them down and we can talk about these questions later on at the end. So why land? Why is it a big deal? Why is it important? What if I told you that from now on, you had to pay other people each month for the air you breathe, right? Like if you actually had to pay money from your bank account to someone else so that you could get your allotted amount of air. That sounds ludicrous, right? But that's the situation we're in today. People have to pay for the location we inhabit, usually to a bank through a mortgage or a landlord through a rent check. And it's not much different from the air, from paying someone else for the air we breathe. Most of that mortgage check or rent check is actually location value. So the building, especially here in Vancouver, like in a large city, is usually very small compared to the privilege of being in a certain location like Vancouver, which is where the jobs are too, right? Makes up about 80% of the location value. So what's the issue? I mean, it's been this way forever, right? Why is this a problem? And I'd like to direct you to the next slide, which is, to me, when I saw this, my jaw dropped. It's this. This shows the percentage change in the income versus the rents. And by rents, I mean all sorts of rents. Rents we pay to the landlord, but also the cumulative rents we pay in form of mortgages, right? Because of increasing land value prices. And what you see is that the median rent price is on the top and the blue income is on the bottom. And you can see that from 1985 to 2020, rents have increased 4 times over incomes, 4 times. And again, it's not just housing prices, but rents. So if you can afford to buy a house, you still have to pay rent. Meanwhile, you are being priced out. And it's a fact of our economic system that rents always increase faster than wages over the long run, unless we do something about it. People are literally being priced out into poverty. So when your grandparents or your parents say, well, back then we could afford, a single family home, you just got to work harder, don't believe them. They couldn't do what they did back then today because the situation is different. We are paying a lot more in rent and incomes have stagnated, as Floyd said earlier in the introduction. How do we fix it? Again, check out the report. It creates an amazing opportunity. But I'm here not to talk so much about the technical implementation. My talk is about why the solution to this problem is harder than you think. At the heart of this issue is our collective relationship to property, to land. We view it not as an investment, not as a commons, and that's really the heart of the matter. So there's a conflict between 2 desires in society. And when I say the word desire, I don't mean what people say they want, but I look at what people actually do that shows a deeper desire. So here in Canada, in the States too, and I think in most industrialized nations, there is a strong desire for higher property prices. And we see that desire expressed in various ways. For example, economic growth leads to higher property prices. Population growth, like immigration and general population growth, also leads to higher property prices. And public sector investments also lead to higher property prices. And we see that the government invests in all three. We want economic growth because it does serve us. We want population growth and we want public sector investments. But the issue is all three actions lead to higher property prices. And let's not forget that 66.5% of Canadians are homeowners. And it stands to reason that a good percentage of those people would like to see their property prices increase. And lastly, let's remember that in a way, the foundation of our current civilization is the sense of private land ownership. And by the word private land ownership, I don't mean just the ability to use land privately, but to extract money from land ownership, right? We have this assumption that land is something that we can profit from, that we should be able to flip and make money from, buy low, sell high, right? That really is the foundation of our current civilization in some ways. And that shows that there is a very, very strong desire for that people have to make money from land. And this desire is in direct conflict with this other desire, this desire for affordable housing, right? Ask the person on the street, do you want affordable housing? Chances are they would say yes, of course. Who doesn't want to have affordable housing, right? There are so many public programs and initiatives out there for public housing, CMHC here in Canada, National Housing Strategy, BC Housing in British Columbia, where I live. And there's a lot of money that the government spends to create affordable housing. The Government of Canada website, there's a whole page dedicated to affordable housing, and I think they're spending $1.9 billion on affordable housing with this latest initiative. And let's remember that 33.5% of Canadians are not homeowners, and there's a good chance that those people want affordable housing as well, right? So there are these two conflicts. One, I just want to share about this conflict. On the one hand, we want to see property prices increase, and on the other hand, we want to see property prices decrease so that they can become more affordable. So here's the question. Can you simultaneously make property prices increase and decrease at the same time? Because that's really what people want as a whole, as our society collectively speaking. We want property prices to increase and decrease at the same time. No, you cannot. Let me repeat that question again, because we are so focused on having both desires met at the same time. We want property prices to increase, but we also want affordable housing, right? But can you make property prices increase and decrease at the same time? You cannot. That's just the fact. In any economic system, you can fulfill one desire, property price appreciation, or the other desire, property price depreciation, but not both. If you're gunning for both, you get the mess we are in today, a schizophrenic attempt to getting both desires met at the same time. And as a result, you can't really meet either need. I'd like to talk briefly about land value taxes, because land value taxes are a clear decision towards property price depreciation. The effect of land value taxes will be that they will cause property prices to decrease. And that's a really good thing, because in the end, just to be clear, if we had to choose between property price appreciation and property price depreciation or decreases, we should always choose lower property prices. It's not healthy for us as a society to profit from land, from real estate, beyond what people work. The more money we spend on rent, the less money we have left over to pay for goods and services. Like what Floyd said, if we have land value taxes, we have a more capitalistic, in a healthy way, a more capitalistic economy where we can have more goods and services, employment will increase, and wages will go up significantly. So land value taxes are a good thing, but there's a catch. Remember desire number one, higher property prices. If you implement a land value tax today, you're gonna, without any other remediation measures, you're gonna run into some serious issues. And I will tell you what those issues are by way of an example. I just plugged this condo from realtor.ca, a real estate website, and cost $540,000 here in Vancouver. Let's just make some assumptions. Let's say that this that we're going to levy a land value tax of 3% on the property, 3%, not too much. And let's just assume that the homeowner has an 80% mortgage on the property, which is common. So $432,000. If we apply a 3% land value tax, we're going to get a 33% decrease in the total property value. It'll be decreased to $360,000. Don't worry about the math. You can take a look at it later on if you like. So the issue is, before you had a property worth $540,000, after the land value tax, you have a property worth $360,000 and have a net decrease of $180,000, which is a good thing because now properties are more affordable again, right? Except for current existing property owners. They would actually incur, not only will the property be underwater by $72,000, because the mortgage itself, the mortgage that the person owes, didn't get decreased, just the property value got decreased, right? So the house would be underwater by $72,000. And the property owner had a net loss or a net decrease, sorry, a decrease in equity by $180,000. So that's not good news for property owners, right? And that is the catch with a pure land value tax without any other remediative efforts. And so when people talk about solutions to this unaffordability issues, they talk about land value taxes, tax reform, even basic income and rent capture. But oftentimes people don't talk about the issue that is underneath it or at the center of it, which is the issue that people don't want property prices to decrease. That's kind of at the core of it. So when there's pushback, usually people are saying, yeah, but. I know it makes sense rationally, but I don't want my property price to decrease in value, right? And that is what people are, I think, most concerned about. And yet we have to find a way to make property affordable again. So how do we do this? It's been done before. This is not the first time that a human society has been at this intersection where property has become unaffordable and we don't know how to move forward. It's been done before. So there are three solutions. One is a basic income plus a reduction or an elimination of income taxes coupled with a land value tax, right? And that's currently what we see in the report at Commonwealth Canada. Another approach is no land value tax, but a gradual transition to community land trusts. And I will talk a bit about that very briefly. And then another approach, a third approach, is where land value bonds are issued to property owners, coupled with a reduction and elimination in income taxes, plus the land value tax, and possibly also basic income. And I will explain each of these. So the first one, I can explain it as well as Floyd and Commonwealth can. I definitely recommend the report. So check out the report. The second is a community land trust. It's a very gradual and slow and tedious process, but it's voluntary, but it requires a lot of cash to acquire land. And I'm sure you know Bernie Sanders, right? He used to be the mayor of Burlington in Vermont in the 80s, and he created the first municipal community land trust. Today, this community land trust owns over 7% of the housing stock of Burlington, Vermont. 7%, that's incredible. So if you're a mayor, or if you are an urban planner with a budget, my recommendation is create a housing trust. Buy up as much land as you can and sell the buildings back into the market, back to developers, but always keep the land. The second approach is a land value bond, where you have a reduction and elimination in income taxes, plus the land value tax. Fred Floyd, an economist that I've greatly admired, he passed 2 years ago. He spoke about it in his essays, and he mentioned that many advocates for land value taxation have proposed that the government buy the land or compensate title holders in some way. If the compensation can facilitate and speed up a prosperity tax shift, let's do it. And next, I'm going to talk about an example, a real life example where this has been done before. Taiwan. In 1949, Chiang Kai-shek arrived in Taiwan after losing the civil war in China, right? So him and his people retreated to the island of Taiwan. And at the time, it was mostly owned by wealthy families. Rents were super high and poverty was widespread. People were poor, they had to pay a lot of rent to landlords. And he was like, look, we can't keep doing this. So he created a Land to Tiller Act in 1949, which was carried out in 1953. And he created a Taiwan Land Bank, which reimbursed property owners with interest-bearing land bonds and compensation for this gradual transition towards land value taxes. He then resold the land back to the market, but with a land value tax attached to it. And because Taiwan did this, today, Taiwan is an economic powerhouse. If you look at statistics, high population density, but low rent. Right? Usually when you get a high population density, you get high rent, but that's not the case in Taiwan. You also have high population density and a flurry of economic activity. Taiwan exports like crazy. They're very powerful. And I just imagine if Canada was like that, I mean, the world would be a massively better place for the United States. So I want to bring you back to this chart. Remember this? Rents being super high and income being low compared to rents. And the direction that we're heading into today is not a good direction. If this keeps going, and I guess it will, we're going to see increased social strife in our society, more so than we have today. I don't care if a country calls itself a democracy. What ends up happening is if a government doesn't take care of its own people economically, there will be increased social strife, and people will not trust the democratic institutions because on some level we experience that those democratic institutions are not looking after our own well-being in some way. And that is currently the situation we have. So I just want to bring your attention back to this chart. And I sure hope that governments are seeing this chart and paying attention, because there is now a time for tax reform, significant tax reform. Otherwise, we'll just keep heading down in this direction. And I think I want to close with a measure of compassion. Especially the young people, Gen Z, are struggling. There's a lot of unaffordability, and maybe we having this deeper understanding of what's actually happening in our current economy, maybe we can have a measure of compassion for people who can't afford housing or who are struggling financially, and realize that, you know, this is not all their fault. This is our collective responsibility. And I think with that, I want to turn it over to Floyd.
Okay, so Martin Adams and I, we're going to do a quick Q&A for a few minutes, like a fireside chat, and then we're going to go over to the Slido. So everyone, please add your questions to the Slido, and then I think Chelsea will facilitate the Slido questions. So Martin, you thought about this for a long time, and the book is exceptional. You told me a few weeks ago that this movement really needs an emotional resonance, because people have been advocating for land value tax for hundreds of years, and economists are unanimous that land value tax is good. Like, they find one economist who says that's not the best tax we should have. I don't think it's not. It's difficult. So, you know, you talked about ending with a measure of compassion. Like, what do you think that is? Like, what do you think that emotional resonance is? I mean, I've been thinking about it, and I think we're literally talking about a generational divide, like almost like a new deal. Like, what's best for future generations, for young families, and coming at a sacrifice that we all have to give up, which is this incentive to profit off land. Maybe you want to share a bit of your thoughts around that.
I think at the heart of the resistance to land value taxes is a measure of fear. And I don't mean it in a bad way. It's more like, hey, if the land value tax gets introduced, I won't be able to afford my mortgage anymore. I'll be underwater, for example, right? So people will need to feel that whatever change comes their way will fully take care of them. They need to be able to trust it, right? This sense of trust. When people don't have trust in a policy shift, that policy shift, I don't believe will stand a chance. So there has to be a measure of trust, and trust can be built once people understand and realize in their hearts that they are safe and that this would benefit not just them, but everyone, and them, especially themselves in the long run, if that makes sense. And that is the feeling component that I spoke to, a sense of safety, that makes sense, and compassion.
And have you had experience talking to politicians about this reform? Like, what you usually experience when you do that?
About whom? To whom?
Talking to politicians or candidates about these reforms. What do you usually hear?
So the issue with candidates is that they are on a 4-year schedule, usually 3 or 4 year schedule, right? And they don't want to rock the boat. And I don't, let's see, it's been a while since I've spoken to a politician. I have spoken with one person in South Africa, and they were implementing land reform. And I think when you're dealing with land reform, things can get dicey because our society, in a way, doesn't want change, but it needs change. And that's really the issue. And frankly, I don't know how to overcome it. I don't know how to overcome this burden that politicians have, which is they're here on a limited time, and they have to please the voters. And I think, therefore, it has to start with a ground movement, kind of like, and I think that's what you're doing, which is so important. Before you can talk to politicians, you have to talk to the people, and you have to get the people behind this. And when you get the people behind it, the politicians will follow suit. That's usually how it works.
Yeah, that is our approach, and we're at the beginnings of it. Everyone here on this call are the early adopters. I was reading a Reddit post last week about a gentleman saying that he wants to buy a home, but he knows it'll cost 50% of their disposable income to buy a home, and his wife wants to have children, and he wants to delay until they have more financial security, and they're already in their mid-30s. And this is the reality we're facing, where like literally our humanity is being sapped, our ability to have families, to prosper, because of high housing prices. And I guess I'm curious, like, when you're speaking to younger people who are confronted with this despair about, will they ever own a home? Like, how has these ideas resonated for them? And what do you usually say to young people about this?
Usually when I explain what the issue is, like you see a light bulb go off and they're like, oh yeah, of course, right? But then also there's a despair sometimes of, well, it's not going to change, right? There's this sense of overwhelm where people understand the issue, or they have this light bulb moment, but then they don't know how this could possibly be different and change. And so I've had people be very excited about the idea, but then kind of move on because they just didn't know what to do about it. And I think that's why it's so important, the leadership that you're taking, that you give people a call to action. And I give them the idea, and then I can now say, go here, go to commonwealth.ca, follow this, take action right here. I think that I haven't had before, and I think that caused a measure of despair. People didn't know what to do.
Well, that's a lot of pressure on us.
No.
Yeah, so I guess we'll
I think you need both idea and action.
Yeah, and if you fundamentally land value tax could be done incrementally. A lot of cities have done
Exactly.
a shift from property tax to land value tax. But I'm really interested in the new generation actually knowing what is a solution to their pain. And I think that really requires confronting, frankly, as you did in your talk, the raw numbers that if we do implement a slow, even over a 20-year period, if we introduce land value tax slowly, that confronts the full rental value of land. Many economists have predicted that the market would respond within the first 2 years to reduce the price of land to a maximum amount, to even up to 70% less.
Floyd and Martin, can I just jump in for 1 second here? I was wondering, Adam or Martin, do you know there's another way of introducing LVT, and that's one person at a time. You don't have to do all or nothing. It's called a land value covenant. And the British Georges have developed this idea. There's a website on it. I'll find it and post it. That means if you personally want to switch to land value taxation instead of income taxes, you can do that, but your neighbors don't have to. And then you sign a covenant with the municipality, and from then on, your property is forever under LVT, but it doesn't affect the neighbors. This is a really brilliant strategy.
Yeah, I'm very grateful that you mentioned that. This is the fourth approach, and I actually mentioned it in my book. And I didn't mention it today, but really thank you for doing that.
And okay, and those of you who are interested, maybe contact me later. I'm interested to explore if there's a way to do a virtual land trust that could basically do that, but do it through private sector incentives and create the system from the bottom up. Anyway, but that's way too technical. So let's go on to the questions. And we have 20 minutes for the official end, but then we'll stay as long as there's questions, because there's a lot of passionate people here. There are a lot of super experts who have joined us as well, who can answer. You're welcome to answer questions as well. You just heard from Frank. He was the former leader of the Ontario Green Party, and his work inspired our work on our report. Just once again, before we go to Q&A, because that'll be kind of the official end of the part of the call where we're talking about some of our logistics. They will be 2 more calls. There are 2 more calls scheduled right now. And I'm just going to quickly share the screen again. 1 moment. So the next call, which will be with me going deeper onto what is Commonwealth. Many of you have already been to that call, so don't come back unless you just want to be there for the Q&A part. That's on May 4th. And on June 22nd, we have Brent Rinaldi of Commonwealth Dividends. So if you want to hear about more than just land, come to that one, because he talks about all forms of Commonwealth, including the financial sector, air, water. We're working on a series of guest speakers to look at all aspects of what Commonwealth is and how we could implement it primarily in Canada. Yeah, I cannot. Right. So please go to the Slido, answer your questions. And after the call, actually right now, we're going to put in, where did it go? A survey link. Feel free to fill the survey in as we go through the Q&A. This survey has a few functions. It's first what you thought of this call, but also it's a way to recruit volunteers. So if you want to help and you have any expertise or excitement to help to create this in Canada, please let us know. We're still determining what our strategy is to do that. So thank you very much. Chelsea, do you want to lead the Q&A part?
Yeah, absolutely.
And all experts are welcome to weigh in.
So our most upvoted question so far is, does our current property tax system already tax land value?
It does, but to a very small degree. Does that answer the question?
So.
To a very, very small degree. Also, I should maybe elaborate a bit more on this. Property taxes are a mixed bag. They also tax the building value, the improvement value, right? So if you renovate your house or if you develop the property, you end up paying more because of the work that you put into developing the property. And that's not a good thing. We don't want to tax people's work because they make life more beautiful. They make society more beautiful. And we want to encourage that, not tax that. And so that's the difference between the property and the land value tax. You don't actually want to tax people's improvements to property. The land itself is what we're concerned with, because land values only increase when other people make your location more valuable, right? So if you get a new business coming into town, a new grocery store moving in nearby, or the city invests in roads or a SkyTrain station, your property value will increase, your land value will increase, not because of anything that you've done. Make sense?
I think so. The next question, as a homeowner, I'm thinking this plan will increase my property tax considerably. Is that true?
Not your property tax. But what it will do is it will increase a land value tax. So if there's a land value tax, then there will be an increased tax, more so than what you're currently paying for the property tax. But I believe Floyd and Commonwealth Canada has planned to offset that payment with dividends from the shared Commonwealth, from the shared land value, if that makes sense. Floyd, do you want to speak to that?
And also, sorry, it would reduce income taxes and sales taxes and business taxes. So it's actually a tax shift, not a tax grab.
Yeah, where Commonwealth differs a bit from mainstream Georgism is we're advocating for half of these economic rents to go towards reducing taxes from the bottom up. So those are the least wealth, even at the first $70,000, for example, of income could be eliminated, because land tax is how you contribute to government, and that would benefit everyone, working people, especially as we move to an economy where more jobs will be non-market jobs. And then the other half could pay a dividend, which could pay everyone $8,000 a year in the shared growing value of our society, of nature, probably up to $10,000 a year if you include the proceeds of an investment fund that could be created. And that's the way we can all share in the value of our evolving economy and society. But really, we're putting all options on the table, because we're for the taxing of rents, because I think it'll solve a lot of the problems we're facing in society. And it really depends on who gets elected. There could be a full dividend of close to $16,000 a year from the full value of these rents, or it could be complete single tax, which leaves a little bit left for paying for a dividend, but not very much. So that's just different philosophies on the spectrum. But what we all agree on is that the private accumulation of land value is what's making life harder for everybody.
Okay, terrific. This next question, I think it's a question more about what we mean when we say economic rents. So the question as it's asked is, when you say economic rents, how does the sense of the word rent relate to me paying a landlord? The analogy is a little vague. So I think it's more, what do we mean when we say economic rents?
Floyd or Frank, should I answer that?
My quick answer is that rent is revenue without any cost of production associated with it. And if you get that through your head, you have a completely crystal clear understanding of what rent is. In fact, we call it rent, but really we should be calling it economic rent, or we should be calling it the rental value of resources. So all taxes should be on the use and the abuse of nature, not on people, not on jobs, not on businesses, not on sales, because that way we would be taxing, or rather collecting, community wealth and not taxing the wealth that people earn.
I think for the lay person, I have a different definition, which is just unearned, and what was the other word I used? Unearned and can't think of it right now, but undeserved, something like that. Like basically money that you haven't worked for, where you haven't added value to society. Money you're getting without adding value to society, right? So if you buy a home for 100 grand, sell it for 150 grand, that 50 grand, you didn't do anything to the house, that 50 grand is economic rent, for example.
Governments do collect some, what they call royalties, and that's another term for economic rent too, because, and other governments apply a super tax, or a super tax, which is a tax on an economic rent. And it's an acknowledgement that there is a revenue stream in the economy that is unearned. And that revenue stream should accrue to government, should accrue to everyone on behalf of, to government on behalf of everyone.
Terrific. All right. How would you answer a homeowner concerned with the loss of value to their asset by a land value tax?
That was pretty much the purpose of my presentation.
That was
so
asked
there,
a while ago, so that might be part
okay.
of it.
Yeah, I mean, basically, that's kind of what I was touching upon in this presentation. As we talk about solutions to this issue, there will be at the heart of the matter will be people who own property who will say, well, wait, but my property values will decrease and I'm going to lose out on equity, right? So there are various answers to that. One is the basic income, like Floyd said. One is the reduction or elimination of income taxes. And then another possibility that I floated is some sort of compensation to property owners. That's been done in Taiwan. And I think maybe it's been done another time.
Another point to make is that poverty is very expensive. People living in
Yes.
subsidized housing is very expensive. Yeah. The healthcare costs, the policing costs are a cost that people who own land are bearing because of their income taxes and taxes on property. And if you eliminate poverty and reduce the healthcare costs and policing costs and all that, you could really reduce the overall taxation on everybody to compensate for the economic rent for the land value tax that everyone who owns land should pay.
And I think at the heart of the issue is there's this conflict for selfish gain or loss versus societal gain or loss, right? When your gain comes at the expense of other people, is it really a gain in the long term? That's what we have to ask ourselves. I don't think so. In fact, we see it every day. We see increase in homelessness. People are unhoused. And what's so funny is that here in Vancouver, there are a lot of people who are unhoused, right? And then on the one hand, you have property owners complaining about the homeless people, right? But on the other hand, they're also complaining about when people try to build more housing next to their properties, right? NIMBYs, so to speak. So you have people who want it both ways, but you can't have it both ways. That's really the issue. Land value is common property.
There is, for Canadians, people know about Nunavut, the territory in the north. It is, in Nunavut, no one can buy land. All land belongs to the government of Nunavut. And people own their own building, and it's on land that they have a lease on, but they don't own the land where their house is on.
There. I also see Edward has an opinion on this part of the conversation, so go ahead.
Well, it's just something for people to think about who are property owners. And the first question I would ask them, do you have adult children? And if you have adult children, where do they live? Because one of the things that we're facing now is that the adult children of many families can't afford to live in the community they grew up in. And so they're commuting longer and longer distances from home and to work. And it's getting worse and worse and worse. So there will eventually be a transfer of wealth from one generation to another. When elder parents die, if they have assets, they'll be transferred to the younger children. Under the current system, that only contributes to an increase in land value. It now gives additional disposable income to people to bid against one another to gain access to a piece of land to build a house on. So we live in an environment where it's a long-term no-win situation for anyone. And that's what I think, the work of Commonwealth Canada, the writing of Martin, and the work that Frank has done, and many of us have done, have tried to overturn. But it is very difficult to get people to see that this is not only in society's best interest, but in their own long-term best interest. It's a challenge.
Fantastic. Okay.
What he said.
The next question. So much of our tax code already disproportionately benefits landowners and baby boomers. How do you supplant their political power if they're going to be the net losers? Now, I will say the millennials are now the largest potential voting group in Canada. So
I think I was just going to say that too. In British Columbia, at least, I think renters are now the majority, majority of voters. I think. So we're going to see more and more people who can afford to buy, and eventually they would become the voter base. We also have to remember that the current tax system that's in place is actually a legacy from the colonial times, when white people came in and took the land and benefited those who registered property in their name and their families, right? And that tax system needs to be dismantled and put together in a different way that truly benefits society.
That kind of leads perfectly into another question that I saw asked in the chat, which was around how can we address, when exploring compensating current property owners for any shift in how wealth building works, how do we also address racial wealth gaps in North America brought about by structural racism in laws and lending, like redlining, et cetera?
Yes, exactly. Generational wealth, right? One phrase, generational wealth. And I think, was it Ed that just spoke about it, or was it Frank? I don't recall. Yeah, I think it was Ed. He just said how when parents, are homeowners, they die, they pass on their wealth to their children, and property prices keep increasing. So what ends up happening is you get this massive difference in generational wealth. Usually white people have a lot more inheritances than Black people, collectively speaking, or First Nations. And so you actually get a massive racial difference in wealth and poverty, homelessness, and so forth. And this just gets worse over time. Does that answer the question?
I hope so. If not, I'm sure that someone will comment in the chat as well.
It might be noted at this point that First Nations in general do not own the land they live on.
Yeah,
it's part of the reservation system.
Exactly.
They're only allowed to own the house they live in.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to have helped them much, but that's just the way it is.
There. Okay, the next question, how can LVT advocacy work in a left-right two-party system?
Let me think about that.
I think Ed has as well. Yeah.
Please, Floyd.
Oh, good. Ed, I think you raised your hand since you're dealing with this in the United States every day.
Well, my friends and colleagues here in the U.S. know that we have worked on both parties, trying to find the thoughtful, reasonable persons in each party, and trying to appeal to them based on their principles, but also there's, to a degree, their ideology. And that is, with conservatives, it's, okay, this is consistent with market dynamics. So what we're trying to do is eliminate monopoly privilege and create a competitive market environment. And for those who are on the left, this is a step towards equality of opportunity to try to remove the wealth gap that's existed for so long. So you have to find people who are thoughtful, have principles, and are looking for policies that will help them achieve those objectives. Unfortunately, we have too many people who seem to have only one objective, and that is to gain power, stay in power, and I don't know what they're...
And exploit everybody else.
and avoid everybody else.
There's
exploit everybody else.
Exploit everybody. Yeah, okay, Mike.
if I can jump in here, the objective when you're a political lobbyist is the laws that get changed are laws that pretty much all parties agree on. They become motherhood. So what we need is rental value capture to become motherhood in all political parties. Left or right, because as we talk a lot on this Zoom call, we are assuming that land value capture benefits the left, but it actually benefits the right as well, because as soon as you collect the rent out of the speculative economy, then investments have to move into the productive economy, and business people want the productive economy to be vibrant. And it's not now. The productive economy is stifled because all the money is going into the speculative economy. So we have to describe and explain to the people on the right and the left the benefit. And only when you succeed in. And the other problem is if you convince the left, for instance, then it gets implemented, and then the right gets elected next time and they'll rip it right out again, or vice versa. So we have to make sure that we are inclusive. The whole economic rental value capture idea is an inclusive idea. It's not exclusive. It doesn't exclude anyone. That's critical to message it. It's commonwealth that benefits everyone.
And
Well said, Frank.
that was well said. And I just want to add to what Ed said, just to clarify for those who don't understand. If you're on the right and you care about the free market, what people don't know is that the property market is actually a monopoly. People don't think it is because you can buy and sell property, right? So it's a free market, right? It's actually not, because land is by its nature limited. There's only so much land in each location. Right? So if you want to buy property, it means that someone else has to give up property, right? You cannot, for example, if you want a new car, the factory will just make another car. Nobody has to give up their car so that you can get a new car. But with land, someone has to give up that piece of land in order for you to move into that piece of land, right? So this ownership of land is by its nature a monopoly, and it doesn't serve the free market. I just want to add to that what you just said, Ed.
Yeah, on the compensation side, on our website, we've evaluated land value tax specifically at commonwealth.ca/housing, and if all of the proceeds went to paying rebates or dividends, like in Canada, we have a carbon tax to reduce pollution, and there's carbon rebates, which give back 90% of that to families. That similar concept could pay almost $14,000 a year to homeowners if we're saying that we want a land value tax to roll back the cost of housing by 10-20 years, and everyone gets full dividends. $14,000 a year is worth more than $600,000 or $700,000 of equity. I'm not sure that trade-off would really land, but it's true. Most people lose less than that in equity and gain this financial security for them and their children and grandchildren. But it just, that's why I think at some point, some sort of rebate reimbursement, some sort of UBI needs to be part of it to help with affordability, in addition to reduction of taxes and shifting of taxes.
I ask a question to Edward and Frank at the same time. Would I be correct in saying that the easy sell for this, for both sides of the political spectrum, or all sides of any political spectrum, I might add, would be the fact that there's going to be more money to buy goods and services at the end of the change to a LVT for both sides? The rich will be able to buy even more yachts, and the poor will be able to buy even more food and goods and services. And yet you won't have lost any wealth overall. The redistribution might be small, but everybody will have more money to spend on what is important to keep living forward.
You answered your own question, Robert. That was very articulate. Thank you.
My answer is it depends on how fast the society moves in the right direction. And, you know, for example, you have individuals in every society who have billions of dollars worth of assets, whether those billions of dollars of assets were earned or unearned or inherited. So if we move toward a single tax, then those individuals will have an enormous amount of assets, whether they were earned or unearned, to reinvest elsewhere. Over time, rent-derived income will disappear from their asset base. So over time, you're going to have in my view, a move toward a society where most or all income in the future is going to be gained from production of goods or delivery of services. But we have too much entrenched wealth to assume that there's going to be any major shift in class from that standpoint, in terms of who owns the most assets, who has the highest level of wealth. It'll take several generations for that to begin to level off, so that there might be many, many more millionaires and far fewer billionaires.
Would I be correct in presuming from your answer that, and your discussion, that most of the wealth out there now, billionaires and all, really didn't come from the land? It came from production of something else that they've managed to hit with multiple factors of expansion. How's that? Because Mr. Buffett doesn't own a truckload of land, but he sure owns a truckload of money. But it's always because he's buying something that's being produced over and over and over and over, which is why what he just said with 2 days ago, he hates Bitcoin. They don't produce anything. Like, he can't see anything returned. And I was just wondering if that's what you've just said.
I don't think that's what I've said. I think that each individual who's very wealthy has gained that wealth in part by doing what society has asked for and they've provided up to a point. But it's also true that under our systems of law, they've enjoyed enormous privileges. They've enjoyed, privilege under law, as Martin or Frank, one of the two, alluded to. They hire lobbyists to make sure that the laws passed by the legislatures are friendly to their business interests. And often that is at the disadvantage of people who do not have that ability to be so influential politically. So when I look at Warren Buffett, I don't know, I can't make a judgment. I'd have to look at his, long-term career and his assets, whether or not he has played fair, or under the system of insurance law in the United States and globally, has he benefited unusually. Now, he's also said himself that he could never have been as successful as he's been outside of the systemic support that he finds in the United States, the system of commercial law and law enforcement, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there are plenty of people who've done well by doing good, and other people who have done very well by doing not very good.
There are basically three revenue streams in society, just to finish off here. One is labor, you work and you earn salary. Two is you own a business and you collect the profit from what your employees earn. And three is you own a desirable resource that generates rent. If you look at a farmer is a laborer. They work on their land themselves. They are also a business person, so they collect the unearned income from their own labor. And thirdly, they're a speculator on the land that they farm on. So when you think about a farmer, you can understand the three revenue streams in our economy. And when you look at land value capture, that is the only one of those three revenue streams which is unearned. Farmers traditionally, they live poor and die rich because their land rises in value over their lifetime and they sell it for $1 gazillion, right? That's because they didn't earn that revenue stream. They earned what you call an operating profit, and their business is an operating profit, but it's only in the speculative economy where you can get windfall profits.
It's just to announce the official end of the call. We've been.
So
I'd like to make a comment. Is that possible?
yeah, we're gonna stay on to answer some questions, but I'm just gonna interject for 1 minute here. So I'm gonna post in the comments again. There's a survey to answer before you leave. If people do have to leave now, more than welcome to. If you want to stay, we'll stay as long as people can to answer questions. But we do have to be respectful of the time. So Martin, I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was fantastic. And you're welcome to stay and answer questions for as long as you have. And I'm very grateful to the panel of people who have been here to answer questions as well. So feel free to stay around and ask questions. I will ask, I'll let this last statement be made, and then I'm going to go back to answering the questions from the Slido first, and then from the chat second, and then we can get into a more open forum after that if people still have questions. But I just need to prioritize the Slido questions and the questions that have been asked in chat first. So, but someone had a statement they wanted to make, so go ahead now.
Okay, I just wanted to say that the Robert's question about the rich being able to consume more, I think the simple answer is that while the private collection of rent would be eliminated, the return on capital would increase. So wages and interest would increase while rents went to the public to share. So that the billionaire might be as well off or better off if he shifted his investments to capital, productive, as someone said, but we don't know. And there would certainly be a lot more wealth. We know that production would increase grossly with a single tax. That's all.
All right. Thank you so much for that.
Thanks.
So the next question that I'm going to ask is from the Slido. It says, how do you feel about ATCOR, or all taxes come out of rents? The idea that all taxes are land taxes, but just with extra steps.
Me? Is that for me? Or
Yeah, I think so. I think most of them are directed at you, but I'm very grateful
sure.
you have some other answers.
Yeah, me too. By the way, those are some of the people you've heard are, forgive me for, I don't want to be ageist, but you are elders, elder Georgists. You have wisdom for all of us, for the newer generation. Yeah, so ATCOR is the principle, ATCOR. That means it stands for all taxes come out of rent. So if you think about it, an income tax, I don't have enough experience, I feel, to answer this question competently enough, but I will give it my best. And then maybe some of you, Frank or others, if you feel like you need to add something, please do. My understanding of this principle is that
What?
Is it almost done?
It is, but they're going to go on a little longer and I'll get a chance to talk.
My understanding of this principle is that all wealth comes from our productive enterprise, right? Which is then collected in land value, right? So if we create a very successful business in a city, right? That business lifts the land value. Or if we invest in public services in a town, that public service adds value to the community and in turn makes property more expensive, right? So you can only tax that income that you make from your business or your service, because eventually that wealth has found its way into the value of land. Correct me if I'm wrong, Frank, or someone else, but that's my best guess.
I'll just throw in quickly. That's correct. One way to really understand that ATCOR is that when you do when you do the research, you'll find that about 1/4 to 1/3 of the GDP in every jurisdiction is taxed by governments. And also, when you do the calculation, like Floyd is doing, 1/3 to 1/4 of all revenue in every jurisdiction is economic rent. So that proves what Georgists and people who advocate land value taxation have been saying all along, that capturing rent by government could replace all other taxes, because in both taxation and rent are equal in every jurisdiction if you do the math.
You want another opinion on that?
Yeah, please.
Well, we know that in the absence of any free land opportunity, that wages and interest tend to a bare minimum below which productivity would fall more than wages and interest were lowered. Therefore, if we were to add taxes, that would drive wages to that point below which productivity would fall and rents would fall. So that's why Mason Gaffney says all taxes come out of rent. Now, it's not 100% true. If we raise the minimum wage, we can tax it back. And that's what we've done in many cases with payroll taxes, sales taxes, and things that people on minimum wage pay. But even today, all higher wages above the minimum legal wage are paid at the expense of rent, because if they didn't, see, these taxes that are levied on high wage workers, special skilled workers, would diminish the incentive to learn the skills and to work harder and smarter. So all those taxes are paid at the expense of rent. But there are a few, any tax that the minimum wage worker pays, who's on minimum wage and so on, is not at the expense of rent. So if we did eliminate the sales taxes, especially in the southern states where they tax food, clothing, and shelter, then of course it would raise their standard of living. But in general, it's an accurate statement.
I'd like to introduce Stefan Horn. Really, yeah, he raised his hand. He's a PhD researcher looking at economic rents at UCL and out of the UK. Really honored to have you here, Stefan. Do you want to weigh in on this question or introduce your work?
Hi everyone. Thank you, Floyd. This has been great. This has been super interesting, and it's great seeing some of the ideas that I'm working on in practice, and see people working with them. Now, I would similar to really just chime in on ATCOR. I think because it's such a fundamental principle of this, and the idea that fundamentally, like a lot of the income that we have in society is rent, and I think you can really just take the basic idea of what do you think would happen if you were a tenant and the government stopped taxing you, and you had far more income at your disposal, and that would happen to everyone in the economy. What would be the next thing that happened? Be that landlords would raise the rent to capture exactly the amount that the government doesn't tax you anymore. So essentially, it just gets to show you. So essentially, everyone is paying twice taxes. They're paying taxes to the government, a public tax to the government, and they're paying a private tax to a landlord. And if you could avoid that situation and just pay one single tax to, like one tax to the government, which happens to be the money that you would pay to the public landlord, also the government, you would have half the taxes going around in the economy. So taxes and rents are sort of, it's a sliding scale between two.
Well spoken.
Very well said.
Thanks.
I have a slightly different real world scenario that might add some light to this question. Assume, let's say, a government has a piece of ground it's going to offer to lease for some sort of development. And there's no zoning. So the government says you can build and use this piece of land however you wish. Our only requirement is that there be a zero pollution result. And so the potential users are going to compete with one another in a sense. They're going to say, okay, I can use this land. What can I construct there? What can I produce? What will my revenue be and my potential profit be? And what is my cost of compliance? And so what they would bid in terms of rent would be based on what they can afford to pay in rent under competitive market conditions and comply with the zero pollution outcome and still make their targeted profit margin. So a lot depends on what restrictions government imposes on how a particular type of land or piece of land is used. And that includes what other taxes are going to be imposed on them as they make that determination of how much rent they can afford to pay to the government for access and control over that land. I don't know if that strikes you as sort of a common sense thing, but that's an example I've tried to use when I've taught on this particular question.
Is that not an impossibility, to be honest? Because there's no such thing as no pollution. As soon as you knock down one tree, you've started to pollute things. As soon as you put in a road, you've ruined the environment right there, underneath that road. Maybe not beside it, but underneath it, it's gone.
Well, in that particular scenario where there's no infrastructure and those infrastructure decisions all have to be made, you're probably right. I mean, the amount that a potential user would bid to control that land would be very low because their responsibility is going to be to produce no negative outcomes. So they might have to put in, as some developers have to put in the roads and utilities, and they have to take care of snow removal in the winter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's going to depend on, in that situation, what the complete list is and whether or not, that is compliance with the outcome of zero pollution. And that's an extreme example, of course, but all I'm saying is that the potential user, knowing all the facts and the costs of doing business, is then going to make a determination of how much can I bid for control of that site. So two different enterprises, one much more efficient than the other, may outbid and pay a lot higher rent for control of that site because who knows, maybe they have really good management, they have really good equipment that they use, et cetera, et cetera.
Terrific. All right, I might rapid fire for a couple minutes because I have about 13 questions left in the Slido and a couple that I've seen come up in the comments. So the next one, regarding universal basic income, how can we address potential concerns on its inflationary effects? Floyd, that might be a you question.
There are a lot of experts here. Well, I mean, this comes up a lot. So first of all, no one's proposing printing money to fund a UBI. I mean, money printing, people associate that with inflation. Second, when we really talk about dividends that everyone receives, in this call, we're talking about dividends that are paid in large part through land and natural resources. These are the same things that are causing our cost of living to be high. So if we're not incentivizing continuing to bid up those prices anymore, because we're collecting the land value tax, then the landlords would not be able to rack up their prices in the presence of a UBI.
Correct, Lloyd, because it's a tax shift, not a tax, not printing money. It will not be inflationary.
Yeah, a tax shift. And then if we're talking about a guaranteed basic income, which again is the realistic, and hopefully we get that in the next 10 years, that is targeted only at people that are in or near poverty. And it's been shown that money gets spent on food, on clothing. There are different arguments. Some would say that would raise landlords' rents as well anyway. I'm not personally convinced of that. I think this is a segment of the population that is renting in a very specific kind of housing. And we've already seen income supports in this country not necessarily to rental increase that are targeted for very specific populations. So we're not talking about a overall universal income that everyone would be spending.
Fantastic. Now, I will say some of the questions might overlap with some things we've already discussed. I'm still going to ask them and we can just touch on them as we go through. The next one is, haven't land taxes already been tried in BC and Alberta?
Actually, we've looked into this. Much of Canada, in the prairies especially, had land taxes in the 1800s. But the question is, what's the intent of it? The intent was not to capture the rental value of land, to make land cost almost zero and have a low cost utopia. The intent was just to have government revenues. So it wasn't high enough in that regard. So from the intent of government revenues, people said, well, property taxes is more progressive. Let's just tax where the money is. Much like now we have a progressive income tax system. So that's why in many places, I think that the taxes shifted away from land tax to property tax back in the day, and then eventually income taxes were introduced. So I think it's really about an intent. And in this case, if a generation sees, well, we need to roll back the cost of housing by 20 years so we can have affordability and improve our economy, that's a very different intent from just how do we maximize revenue generation through progressive means.
Nice. With the rising cost of living and stagnant wages, how do you propose we counter this perception that the only way to build any wealth is to invest in real estate?
Yeah. Anyone?
I will speak to that real quick. Currently, people see, I mean, imagine if you're a millennial, right? You've come of age, not to like, and you're 18, maybe, I don't know, is it 5-10 years ago? Is that the right time frame, right? And in the past 5 to 10 years, all you've seen is property price increases. Like you've seen parents, uncles, aunts, family members, friends, or parents of friends make a ton of money with property price increases, right? So naturally, they would be like experiencing the thought or these thoughts of, well, the way to make money through real estate, right? So this generation has not yet experienced what I think some other generations have experienced in the 80s and the 70s, where property didn't actually go up and it did go down for some time. So that's not an answer, but it's just a reflection, I guess, that it may be that life will help us by having the newer generation come to realize that property is not a panacea to wealth and everlasting happiness. Especially in the coming years, I think we're going to see a lot of pain and suffering in the real estate market.
If you look at the long-term returns to real estate versus other investment assets, they tend to be quite similar. But long-term real estate has been shown to be a little safer. So after land value tax, you'd still have plenty of opportunities to invest in stock markets, index funds, start a business. It would make land itself be a less lucrative instrument relative to other investments that actually help the economy. So I mean, I would throw up a slide and show that there's much better opportunities out there than land as a long-term asset appreciation asset. One in which that
maybe in retrospect, maybe, but
Yeah.
I think the point of it is all taxes come out of rent except the ones that paid by minimum wage workers. But all these other taxes may come out of rent, the actual rent, but they don't discourage land speculation, which is the cause of unemployment, low wages, and a shortage of housing. And that's what we need to emphasize, that taxing land creates more available land, which is needed for jobs and for housing. Fair enough?
Yeah. And I think people would be better off owning stock portfolios that they could spend on better housing eventually than own housing, which their wealth goes into buying other housing that costs the same amount. You're not actually ahead in that regard versus owning stocks. You're just kind of at a neutral equivalent. But that was very, very poorly worded.
And I think what the new generations need to know is that currently, if you choose to buy a house, you're going to spend an inordinate amount of money paying another person and a bank for your mortgage. Imagine if you didn't have to pay that much money and you could put so much more money into the stock market or in index funds and make a lot more money rather than keep paying interest payments on your mortgage.
Another benefit of getting rid of this notion that land is your future, because as soon as you own the property, you are tethered to it. In fact, you become a prisoner of it. You can't really move to where you want to be. You can't travel as much. It's restrictive. It's unnecessarily restrictive. And if you received your share of the economic rent through your bank account rather than by owning land, it would be very liberating for people all over the world.
Mr. Dodson, your hand is up.
Yeah, I guess what I have to offer on this question is I think many young people face reality and make the right decisions for themselves at this time. In other words, I don't know what the statistic is in Canada, but in the United States, roughly 50% of all college graduates under the age of 30 years live at home with parents. My parents would have never suffered my presence that long, but I can understand if my mother, was making my meals and doing my laundry and I had a decent income to go out and party with my friends, I might be tempted to stick around longer than I ought. but I think a lot of it is economic, that young people are doubling up in terms of sharing housing. I know I've seen articles about that in many cities. Even people that are working for the high-tech firms can't afford to live on their own, and so they have, quite a few friends living together. So I think they're making the decisions based on their current situation and what they're likely to be able to afford. The question, I guess, for any society, and in selling the idea of land value taxation, is, do you want your society to be a renter occupied society, or you want people to be an owner occupied society? And what are the costs and benefits of that? In my profession, we sold home ownership as a way for neighborhood or community stability. That people who own a property do have a greater sense of responsibility toward one another in the community, look after one another more seriously than people who simply rent an apartment and are somewhat transients. So there in my view, there are a lot of social issues associated with renting versus home ownership, the cost of renting, the cost of home ownership, and land value taxation, if it's adopted over time, will help us work these out. The market will work it out, and people will make wise decisions based on their own personal financial situation, their family's financial situation, and their desire to be a member of a community.
Sir, I can tell you for a fact that the decisions you just discussed to us about people sharing properties and combining their incomes to make things work are done under the duress of, I have no goddamn choice and I'm pissed off.
Right.
My son, who is 27, with a 27-year-old bride to be, has just told me for the first time that, Dad, I don't see that I'm ever going to be able to afford a house. It pisses me off. I'm upset. I'm distressed. And his father's recommendation was get the hell out of town and buy a property farther from where you want to live. But the work will still cause him undue distress because now he has to commute, and commuting is a waste of economic value in the largest scale I've ever seen. I can't imagine. Commuting is just the dumbest thing in the world for everybody. And that's the only way he will own a house, to be able to bring up what he hopes to have is only more than 1 or 2 kids, never more. And yet he knows he's trapped by the fact that he cannot afford to live in the city where he would prefer to live. Actually, 2 cities.
Well,
One
and
where
you
his
just
family lives.
identified, what one of the practical choices younger people are making. They're delaying marriage, and even if they do marry or move in with one another, they delay, postpone, or avoid having children.
Which becomes economically distressing from the community's point of view, because the older a young lady is having children, the more she is at a health risk.
Yeah.
And the farther the economy is pushed backwards, because it's better to have your kids when you're in your 20s than in your 30s. And yet my latest grandchild will be from a daughter that is in her 40s, which is just plain ass distressing to me. My mother managed to have 8 kids before she was 30. Go figure. And we're not even Catholic.
We certainly have our challenges, don't we, in trying to preserve, what level of our ability to enjoy this life that we've been given, given the economic system that we've created.
And I think, sir, that's one of the reasons I put to everybody on the forum right here, right now, is how is it there are so many people with gray hair here? I'm starting to think we might have all realized that we have made some kind of mistake. And my parents made a bigger mistake before me that I'm now paying for, and my kids are all about to start paying for it. My grandchildren are absolutely screwed. And I'm thinking the gray hairs here, no disrespect to the gray hair, we're starting to believe it in our core that we did something wrong, that we haven't learned how to share wealth appropriately. And if I'm wrong with somebody else besides me, please speak up.
I don't know that you're wrong, but I do think that having a call at 2 p.m. Eastern on a Thursday is also probably relating, because I think some people are still at work. So I think we tend to have more retirees on calls that are during the daytime Eastern time.
Good
So,
point, Chelsea.
yeah, don't want anyone to feel like they're singled out. I am going to move on to another question. Sorry, guys, I have 8 more to go on here, 2 more in the chat, and I will try to rapid fire as much as I can. But I don't disagree with you, Robert. I think that was very insightful. So this question is, land has been commodified and wrongly allowed to be held in private wealth portfolios of individuals. Do you see this also happening with water?
Yeah, Mike Curtis earlier on alluded to the economist Mason Gaffney, and Mason has written extensively on water-related issues, and certainly we've seen systems privatized around the world with no net benefit to the population, only net benefit to the entity that gets the license to deliver the water to the community. So I think this is a major societal issue. Henry George would have argued that is a public utility, and so should be owned and managed by the government.
Remember, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting over.
Oh, Stefan, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add on water. That's something I'm sort of grappling with myself in my research. It's like, ultimately, if you go back to the classical economist, water is land in the sense of it's part of nature. It's a sort of natural thing. It's sort of natural asset. And in that sense, you can pretty much apply the same. We just happen to live on land and not in water, but you can apply the same thing to water as well. And then, of course, there's the other aspect then of natural monopolies. And it's quite interesting that, I thought it was Adam Smith who said that land is naturally a monopoly. So there's a sliding scale to natural monopoly as in the public utility, and land being naturally a monopoly as in by the fact that we live on a planet that's just limited. So if you own a piece of earth, you have a natural monopoly like a utility ultimately. So it's all kind of related ultimately. So
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay. This next one, I think we've touched on this a little, but even if you offer tax bonds, cash grants, or income tax reductions, retirees still use their home values as retirement income. Aren't they going to get screwed?
Well, there's a whole industry designed to take their equity away from their residential property, and it's called the reverse mortgage. And generally, the people that take out a reverse mortgage loan are in need of income. So it's beneficial to them. They're able to, get an annual income or a monthly income in addition to whatever they're getting from retirement, Social Security benefits, et cetera. But it does reduce the inheritance value of their property to be transferred to their children. So this idea we were talking about earlier of this huge pool of wealth that's going to be transferred from one generation to another, it seems as though, at least in the United States, because we do not have socialized medicine, that the cost of medical care and some other costs of living have driven an increasing number of property of senior citizens to take out these reverse mortgages in order just to pay their bills. And I don't know if Canada has a similar situation. We always look to you as an example of a better health system.
Ditto in Canada, but it's not the expense of health. It's the lack of savings that has caused that problem in Canada.
To go back to the question, the as long as we're doing this on a local level, in my opinion, the value of land and the income from land would increase as long as the land was put to its highest and best use. So the senior citizen probably wouldn't have any problems with their income from a reverse mortgage or anything else until we apply this land value tax so broadly that it creates the free land margin, which raises wages and interest and lowers rents. So by that time, we have plenty of money to fund Social Security out of land rents, and what they might lose from a reverse mortgage, they would be compensated for with a decent income from Social Security, or a citizen's dividend.
Well, that's great to hear, actually. Makes it more appealing even. Another reason to sell it that way.
Yes.
For sure. This is an interesting one, and it might be a little difficult for us to answer based on who's standing here, but how would the longstanding abuse of Indigenous communities be acknowledged and rectified? We touched on racist policies and things like that, but this is specifically in tune to Indigenous questions.
I did hear the question, but would you mind repeating it again? I really want to get the gist, the heart of
How
it.
would the long-standing abuse of Indigenous communities be acknowledged and rectified?
I'm assuming how it would be rectified through this tax or prosperity shift?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
It would not. That's the end of story right there. The Native Canadians, at least here, given that I have an American counterpart next door to me, have given an X amount of land, an X amount of money, and a land value tax would never be applied to them unless they applied it to themselves, because they are their own nations, and we have no right as the Canadian government to apply taxes to their land that we have given them and told them, look after yourselves, that's it, you're on your own. And as such, we cannot rearrange things without having to go to war virtually with all the Native Canadians in at least Canada, because they're going to say we own the land. And they do, because we have given it to them to govern as they see fit. So land value tax, unless they applied it to themselves, there's no way for us to get them to be part of the same equation, because they're already in effect living that same thing, because they don't pay taxes on the land they live on. They own their homes, they get their incomes, but the land is owned by the community as a whole. And Stefan, you want to kick at the can, because maybe I got this wrong, but
No. I think
No,
you
it's
got it exactly right. And furthermore, as the cities redevelop and develop to their full potential, there'd be a lot less pressure on the Indians, and the quality of their land, and much of it might be given back to them, would give them a higher standard of living.
Let's hear from Stefan and Martin and
Yeah, no, I was going to say, it's actually quite interesting. I think that with the Indigenous system and legal system and narratives, you actually have an alternative land regime, and I think that's actually quite an asset in a way. Something you have in New Zealand as well, where it's ultimately operated like a community land trust, where land rents are not monetized, but they still allocated, because the thing about land rents is they don't go away just because you decide not to monetize them. If you live in a fully outright owned property and you don't have a mortgage, you still benefit from land rents, imputed land rents, which used to, in fact, actually be taxed in the UK, for example. And I think it's quite interesting that something like a community land trust, or the Indigenous models actually might be an alternative that could provide you have a sort of different models that can learn from each other. And I was quite interested about what Floyd was alluding to earlier, the idea of a sort of a virtual land tax, a virtual land trust, the idea that you don't have to monetize land rents for them to be existing and be allocated to people.
Just to add to this also with the Indigenous and the First Nations, I think if we end up succeeding in implementing a prosperity tax shift in our society, there would be an unprecedented sense of prosperity and abundance in our society. And I think the very thing that drove us to come here as white people and push away First Nations from their land was the sense of scarcity that we experienced back in Europe when essentially feudalism had taken over, right? And the only way out of that feudalism was to come to the New World and occupy the land and have this financial security that you needed, that you didn't actually have in Europe. And I think if we can resolve that here in this new world, so to speak, we will, by definition, create a new relationship with the people who have inhabited this land before us and their descendants who are here today.
Mr. Dodson.
Well, this issue of sovereignty within sovereignty is a challenging one, given the fact that our relations with the First Nations going back is so terribly violent. And it's been violent on both sides, for centuries. We white people had the more violent potential to be violent because we had the more superior weaponry and we brought the worst diseases. So the question is, how do we make reparations, and does land value taxation have the potential for doing this? I think, Robert, you alluded to this possibility that if the rest of the country is shown to be developing very successfully and with environmental protections, the First Nations will see that as a policy and they may adopt it within their own tribal lands. The other point I think that, and this is why I said sovereignty within a sovereignty, is it reminds me of what Professor Nick Tiedemann in the US has talked about, and that is that rents should be collected locally, and then the local government would pay for the services that they get from higher levels of government. So, for example, the First Nations are ostensibly benefiting by protection, defense protection from external attack. So that has some potential value. So while right now in First Nations, and is generally true of all community land trusts, even where our friend Mike Curtis lives, a much lower percentage of the full market rent is collected by the community. If the bill came from the Canadian government to the First Nations for X number of dollars for payment of its defense benefits, then they might have to look to reducing the subsidy that they're giving to their occupants. So I don't know how that would all work, but it does seem to me that Nick's idea of local government compensating higher levels of government based on the value of services received, at least that gets us somewhere to fairness.
Yes, I agree with that. Yeah, that's sort of what I'm looking at as well.
Come on, Mike, you want to say something? I can see.
I do want to say something.
Speak, sir.
Or did you mean some other Mike? I feel that what Ed said is fine for other communities, but for the Indians, maybe they could take them at land rent and repay them for the atrocities they've committed against them.
Yeah, that I certainly can see that as well, being a benefit. I am going to move on to the next question. There are, again, about 6 or 7 more here, a couple in the chat. So I'm going to try to go through, and I know some of them we've already touched on. This next question is, how can LVT resolve the problem of landlords evicting tenants by raising rents, then leaving the space empty and unproductive, sometimes for years?
Well, it's pretty simple if they
Well, that's an easy one.
Yeah.
Do you want to go ahead, Mike?
Yeah,
it's pretty
sure.
easy.
If they have to pay the full rental value of the land, it would cost them too much to leave it empty. They'd have to rent it to the person who's offered to pay them the highest amount of rent.
Fantastic.
Question, Mike, before that leaves. Would it not be possible for someone with a high value to let the land sit there vacant anyway? Would it not make more sense? And I'm going to give this to Mr. Dodson and Stefan, and you, of course, that you get away with 1 year and now your taxes go up because you've left it vacant. Get away with the second year, and at some point, fourth or fifth year, maybe it's seized from you because we can't leave land vacant in the middle of the city.
Well, if we were collecting the full value, they would have to pay the same whether they use it or not. And if they didn't use it, they would go bankrupt. Unless they have a fetish for vacant land and they happen to have a lot of money in the bank, but there would be no benefit to them to leave it empty. There would be no selling price of land. Remember, you're collecting the full rental value. So it would just show insanity. And as one of my neighbors said, you can't legislate against insanity, but you can make it damn uncomfortable.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to know, because there's always people rich enough out there that, so screw this shit, I'm going to do what I want. You know what I mean?
Right.
One issue would be whether or not the laws of that particular city or community allowed the community to put a tax lien on our property other than the subject property. In other words, if I own a piece of land and I owned a land tax, a land value tax, and failed to pay it, and interest and penalties accumulated above the potential value of the property to repay that debt, could other assets be seized?
Absolutely.
Now we give somebody a motivation to pay the bill.
But I think the part of the question was rent evictions. And what is the answer to that? The incentive to evict someone and then raise rents on the next person is independent of land. It's also a property rents incentive. What are some of the thoughts on that?
Long-term leases with tenant rights. I mean, maximum rent escalation clauses. But that's all depending upon that there's a greater supply of landlords looking for tenants than tenants looking for landlords.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean,
That's
you should
the heart
probably
of the issue, I think.
yeah, no, Martin, you go.
Oh, please. Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's really the root of the issue, right? Again, it's like employment. If you have more people looking for jobs, then you have jobs, right? Wages go down. And if you have more jobs, then people looking for jobs, wages go up, right? In that sense, right?
Amen.
If you have a land value tax and you force people to use land efficiently, then what ends up happening is you get a lot more supply. People will start using land and they will build housing left, right, and center. And essentially, landlords won't have an incentive to evict anyone because they are damn pleased to even have a tenant, if that makes sense.
Well, I think in the existing system, you have the problem that you have people live in properties they can't really afford, or like they have subsidized rental payments. And I think if you come in and you tax the full market value for land, they might be displaced. And you probably have to find some sort of arrangement for that. I mean, one would be that you just limit, I suppose, the land tax to the rental payment. So you essentially decapitalize the land. The land value drops to zero because it has the, you know, is affected by the lease. So the lease, what the tenant pays the landlord has to pay to the government. So the value of this capital asset becomes zero, in which case the government might as well buy it out and just offer this subsidized lease as social housing, or give it to community land trust or cooperative to operate at cost. But yeah, I think that's definitely a problem that some people might not afford, at least in the short term, the market rate of land of land rents. And of course they can always move, but I think a lot of the discourse around housing is that people get displaced, and in this case they might just be displaced by the government instead of a private landlord. And I think there would have to be some protections. legitimate protections. Not if somebody lives on 400 square meters in the center of town or by themselves, obviously there's some sort of limitations to, is this really necessary as a sort of subsidized setup? But in the UK, that's certainly a discussion, by advocates of land taxes and property taxes, both, that, there should be a phase-in of these, that, it doesn't mean that from one day to the next you get displaced from your home and your community. But it happens slowly, and the next person would have to pay the full rate, say, for example.
Question to Stefan. Are you suggesting that people would be forced out of their houses because they are poor? Which is what I think I heard, but I might have got it wrong.
Hopefully.
And another on top of that is, I think everybody here understands that the poor are the ones that do the minimum wage jobs that we all need to survive. And to be honest with you, a minimum wage is by definition an insult to the person that's receiving it, and an insult to and a gross insult to the person that's suggesting they deserve it.
I mean, I think a central problem is that if you start, for example, if you take a very sought after location, if you take like Vancouver or London, Toronto, then there are some people living in very attractive neighborhoods that have their community there, and they do jobs that would not allow them, the key sectors. If you say you're a nurse, you're doing a very important job, but it's not adequately compensated. And you have your community in central Toronto. If you charge the full market value of land on this person, they might not be able to afford it. And I think you have to find a way to account for that and to protect these people from displacement. That's essentially what I'm saying.
Well, there's the basic idea is that with a single tax, everybody is going to be able to work. There's going to be full employment for everybody who's willing and able to work. There's still going to be a few people who are physically and mentally unable to work. And in that regard, the government can subsidize them out of land rents. That's what we need to pay for national health care is land rent, to Social Security. And whether we give them cash or we give them public housing, those that are unable to take care of themselves, we need to do it, and we would be able to do it with land rent. And of course, because we would create a free land opportunity, then obviously anybody has a negotiating lever in the marketplace. And as the gross domestic product increases, it always increases more on the superior land, and that's what creates land rent. And this free land opportunity is what sets wages and interest. So while material progress advances, wages, the general rate of wages and interest goes up, and the rent on particular lands goes up, and that's how we fund the infrastructure, the social service, and national defense and social programs, Social Security, and ultimately a cash dividend. And I should add medical and environmental research and development.
All right, this is where my ignorance kicks in, gentlemen, because I'm dealing with a way smarter crowd than I am. Mike, what you just said suggests to me that it's not possible to have subsidized housing without the government stepping in and providing it for those who need it. Am I correct with that?
I think you are correct with that.
Okay.
Is that good?
Who else is going to subsidize it?
No, but is that good or bad?
Well, we don't believe you'd need much of it because the market would provide it for virtually everybody. But there might be some people who were physically unable to work, mentally unable to work, and would need some help. And we have a socially created fund, not taken from anybody's productions, any individual or corporation, socially created in the value of land. And with that, we can take care of our national family.
Would that involve shipping them to the perimeter of the land value system, or would that allow them to be within the big city where they really need to be to put up with, to live within the best life they could live?
Well,
and I am not this guy.
I mean, let's just take San Francisco. That's considered one of the nicest places to live. And I guess everybody can't live there. Everybody can't live in paradise. So somebody who's on the lower scale, maybe, but I think we could figure out a way that they could live with their family, even if they were unable to work and needed help from the government. But I don't think we're going to be able to take a person who's unable to get a job because they're mentally or physically unable to and put them in a penthouse in New York City. I don't think we can do that. I don't think the single tax would provide for that. No, but
I
I
have
think it would provide for the basics.
I have one comment for you, Robert, then I must leave for the afternoon. I made my living helping to develop affordable housing in gentrifying neighborhoods. So I'm a very strong believer that the community owes to people who work for a living in the city the opportunity to live in decent, affordable housing within a short commute to their working place. And that our community should be mixed income and mixed race, and that's part of what a truly democratic society provides by conscious decision. The market works only so far along this. So when I would go into a city in the northeastern part of the United States, that was my territory, and meet with community groups and developers, we would bring together members of every stakeholder group and come up with consensus made decisions on what we should do. So you're going to have segments of people who are going to be opposed to high-rise apartment buildings, or you're going to have people who are going to be opposed to limited equity co-ops, and you're going to have some people who are going to be opposed to any green space. But if the community organizes that kind of discussion, usually you can come up with a compromise, because people will finally get the idea. Hey, look, I work in this office building downtown every day, and that's my job, and I have a really nice house. And every evening when I go home, people come in to clean the place, and they have to travel 2 hours by train to get here, and they're making $15 an hour or whatever. And so we need to make it possible for each strata of that community to be able to live together, and that's my belief. And I support and always have supported those kinds of public policies.
Well, just for the record, if I wasn't so happily married, you're my guy. The truth of the matter is, I am self-employed and a private landowner, and I still believe in everything we're talking about here and always have. And it's an internal conflict of interest, which I find amusing, because I'd rather be on your side of the fence. But again, I've managed to survive on my own. And I don't know what that's all about, to be honest with you. I'm 69 years old, and it's like, why the hell do I want to be such a socialist when I'm really such a screaming capitalist? Which is why I put this question to everybody out there. It's like, what have we recognized that we've gotten wrong?
We've forgotten about the sense of community.
Well, I haven't, because I believe in it.
Well, and how to make it work. How to make it work.
Sorry, guys, I just briefly we have to stop recording because Ken has to leave. So I'm just gonna give a little last word for the recording, and I believe Martin has to leave as well. Thank you all so much for coming and for being here for an extra hour and a bit. And Martin, thank you so much for your talk. It was very insightful, and I want to thank our other experts as well.
Great seeing you, Martin.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good seeing you.
Thank you to everybody.
Good to see you. Thanks so much for having me again. Really appreciate it.
I think